Hey guys, welcome to BP, the Bible Perspective. A reasonable police officer. That's what the defense lawyer for Derek Chauvin is saying in his defense closing arguments. Did he just sink his own client? Now, before we get into it, please like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible Perspective. And as always, if you have a thought or comment, add it to the comment section below. All comments are welcome. Well, I'm kind of doing this unusual kind of response, I have to say, because as we're taping this, I'm actually looking at the defense closing. Well, I'm really not looking at it. I mean, I'm going to do like a lot of people. I'm going to get the highlights later. That's not always a good thing, by the way, too, because people pick and choose. But the one statement that kind of caught me in all of his closing statements is a reasonable police officer. Now, let's kind of backtrack for a minute, because I think now pretty much everybody knows the case of Derek Chauvin. He is the police officer whose knee was on the neck for 9 minutes and 20 seconds of George Floyd. That murder, I still call it a murder, caught the attention of the world. I mean, I can only imagine it had if the kind of cameras were around during the Emmett Till trial. Well, back then, Emmett Till's murder caught the attention because they had still photos, but there was a video. Well, the police officers, there were 3 police officers that were eventually arrested. Actually 4, I'm sorry. And now Derek Chauvin, the lead person, the most culpable, in my opinion, is on trial now. And at the time of this recording, his defense lawyer is giving his closing arguments. Now, you have to kind of give it to defense lawyers, and sometimes they do get, I think, unfairly vilified. Let me just give you a gauge. If I was on trial for anything, I would probably want this kind of lawyer who will go out of his way to try to create reasonable doubt. Because basically, that's all he has to do is to create reasonable doubt. So we kind of forget that, that his job is not to even prove the innocence of his client. The Constitution has already done that. We need to understand that. Remember, the Constitution says we all start off innocent. So it is the prosecution's job to make their case. The defense lawyer simply has to maintain the innocence. Therefore, create reasonable doubt on the prosecution case. Now, sometimes, of course, these defense are silly, outrageous, laughable. But nevertheless, if they can just target one juror to kind of buy into it, and then they can at least get a hung jury. And in some cases, they've gotten acquittals. Remember O.J. Simpson, right? People wonder how in the world could a jury acquit. Now, I do not believe that Derek Chauvin is going to get anywhere close to an acquittal, but he might get a hung jury, in which case the prosecution will probably retry. That's how hot of a topic this trial is. But what's interesting that I noticed that the defense lawyer, in my opinion, is kind of making a big mistake, because if I was the potential juror, I would listen to that reasonable, and this is what his words is, reasonable police officer. Of course, he's had several reasonable police officers take the stand and reasonably say that what Derek Chauvin did wasn't reasonable. It was murder. It was against policies, against training. And that's what you kind of got to look at. If you want to say what's reasonable is, and of course, let me just, for one brief moment, kind of give you his side. So basically what he's trying to suggest is that, well, you got to consider the circumstances, the danger factor, the alert of the call itself. In other words, who are we dealing with? So, for example, if a police officer receives a call and they have to respond to a call, then the dispatcher may give them certain information, such as armed or not armed, or maybe the nature of the call, which will say, well, maybe it is a armed robbery, murder, domestic violence, or passing fraudulent bills, maybe theft or whatever. That kind of lets the police officer generally give them a general idea of what they're walking into. So when this defense lawyer say reasonable, yeah, to me that hurts his client more, because what was he walking into? He tried to give some coded language, my opinion, when he said large. He didn't say black though, but large. But we know he's black. Everybody knows he's black. But then, again, reasonable. So what would be reasonable for a police officer? Well, first and foremost, they show up. The call was, and remember, the call was for a man passing a fake $20 bill. Now, you gotta have to understand that if George Floyd was intentionally passing a fake $20 bill, would he hang around? Because when the police showed up and they found him, he was sitting outside the liquor store. Would he hang around? Okay, maybe. Sometimes criminals are dumb. More often, criminals are dumb. But you kind of would think, well, maybe he would get out of Dodge too if he was passing a $20 bill. Now, on the other hand, he could have not known he was passing a $20 bill. Here's the point. They hadn't concluded that either way. They don't know. Which makes the case even more than how did it go from a simple fraudulent $20 bill to death. See, what is reasonable? Of course, when the cops got there, they immediately went from interrogation to arrest. Now, of course, then the situation became volatile because George Floyd was resisting. He didn't want to go into the police car. Reasonably, can you say, did it deserve a death sentence? But that's not the point. He was in a police car, and had they just simply left it at that, they could have took him to jail, kicking and screaming. But they didn't. The Chauvin shows up and pulls him out of the car while handcuffed. Is that reasonable? Puts him on the ground and puts his knee on his neck. Why? So if you say what is reasonable, okay, so you take him out of the car while he's handcuffed and you put his knee on his neck, would a reasonable police officer do that? Would a reasonable police officer hold his knee on his neck for 9 minutes? Would a reasonable police officer hold his knee on his neck after everybody's telling him we don't see him moving? When a couple of people took pulses, including the paramedics, and even after the paramedics arrived and took his pulse, he still had his knee on his neck when he wasn't moving. So would a reasonable police officer do that? And I'm going to say that those statements, I'm going to say, yeah, let me be reasonable. And did he just sink his client more than he ever could have helped him? That's the BP, the Bible perspective. All right, guys. Don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to BP, the Bible perspective. And as always, if you ever thought a comment, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. Till next time, I'll see you then. All right.